Hello again. So, Lindy Beige is a channel I watch from time to time. Historian, so goes into history, of course. He also does videos on like making stuff, like how did they make rope back in the 1300s or whatever, and he will do a demonstration of that. And recently he came out with one about Stone Age tools and drilling holes through rocks. Going to put a link to his video down there. I'm not going to try to cover everything he covered, but I watched it. It's a good video. My question is, so how did people come up with this method of doing it? And of course, his video is somewhat guesswork. I mean, it's based on how we know people did things in historical times. We can try to extrapolate and figure out how people would have done it in prehistorical times. So there is some guesswork to his video, but it's fairly good guesswork. So the one criticism I have of his video is several times he talks about people are drilling through rock and they have to do it something. They need something harder than rock to drill through rock. And my answer to that is, but don't rocks come in different hardnesses? So, saying you can't drill through rock with rock because rock is equally as hard as rock, it depends on the kind of rock you're using. And he even points out in the video, if they had garnet, which they possibly did, garnet stone's good for grinding through stuff. And they use sand in his production. And sand is basically just a mineral, very tiny stones. So he did actually address the possibility that you can use rock to drill through rock, but at the same time he repeatedly makes the statement that you can't. So that's my one criticism of his video. Other than that, it's a pretty good video. So I'm going to. So how did he do it? Quick rundown on that. Basically, discovered. Well, past discoveries. Go to museums. You can see. Here's a rock with a hole drilled through it. It was used as an axe head or whatever. We have found partially drilled holes. And so we'll have a rock and it'll have a round indentation in it. And usually there'll be a raised part in that round indentation. So they had some sort of hollow tube that they were using to do the drilling with. And that's about all you can really get from the evidence we have. So he's assuming it was some sort of bone. Bone's hollow. So he's trying to do this with as authentic as possible tools. He does use a few modern things when necessary. Even then, it was more of a matter of the wood I'm going to use from this is cut nice and square as opposed to using solid sticks or whatever, just to make it easier. But so his plan was going to make a little lattice to hold our drill bit in, drill bit being a piece of antler. The antler had to be cut, so we have a nice flat cut in our antler. He used a hacksaw for that. There's a question, how are we going to get that done? So we make a little lattice that we can put on our stone, and it'll hold our bone in place. I keep saying antler because he mentioned the possibility that antlers was used at one point, but he did it with bone. And so basically the whole idea of the lattice is it holds my drill in place. So instead of slipping around as I'm trying to turn it, it's, in this crosshairs. So we made a little lattice out of wood. He did this with a friend, so one of them was working the drill, the other was holding stuff in place. So it was a two-person operation. And again, they put a little, got a imprint started as best they could, put some wet sand in there to get to some grinding power, and worked on it. Now, Took them about 3 hours to get a very short impression, and that they didn't mention was this 3 hours total. We're experimenting for a while, and then we sort of figure out how it worked, and now we're going to experiment a little more and get the details worked out. And okay, here it's working. Now we're going to start doing it. Is that the full 3 hours, or was it experiment, experiment, experiment? Okay, here's how it works. 3 hours of actually doing it. He didn't mention that, or I didn't catch it if he did. So that would be one thing of interest I would want to know. So the turning the, going to call it a drill. It was a bone. He basically did you might have seen, Boy Scout manual or whatever. You got like a curved stick. You got a string run around it, and the string has a loop that you put your your thing you want to turn in. So as you move the stick back and forth, the string rubs against the object, and it causes it to turn back and forth. They use it to start fires and stuff. Build friction. Well, he was using it to run his drill. Again, is that how they did it back when they were doing this in their own time? We don't know. It's, again, best guess with the what we know. It makes sense. Then also there was the problem, bone is very rarely round, perfectly round. So they had to experiment with the bone and cutting it at different lengths just to find a nice and round spot that would be able to be used as a drill. So they had to play around with that a bit. Once they got all that worked out, and a little experimentation with how does the little bow work that we're using as a driving device, they started making good progress. So yes, based on the evidence we had, which is basically some pieces of stone with partial holes drilled through them, and our knowledge of how people have drilled things in the past, they came up with a fairly good solution to how this might work. So I want to look at now, would Stone Age man have been able to do that? I'm going to speculate on this, because this is, I'm watching him doing this, I'm like, this is actually fairly fascinating, and it's using some ingenuity that I wouldn't have thought of. Someone who's worked with old tools would have thought of it. Someone who's never had a tool or only had stone tools to bang things with, how did they think of it? That's what I want to speculate on. Now, first thing, why would you even do this? Well, you drill a hole through your rock so you can attach a handle to it of some sort. So why do you want to do that? Well, if we're having a rock fight, I can hit you with my rock, you can hit me with your rock. If I attach it to a stick, I can hit you with my rock from a little bit out of range. So that gives me a slight advantage. That's one reason. Another reason is I swing my arm at the elbow and hit something as opposed to swing it at the shoulder and hit it with something. For about the same amount of effort, I can do more impact with the longer. So having a little reach on my rock, I can do more impact with it with the same amount of effort. That's another reason. And I would imagine that they, whoever was doing this figured that out after they figured out, hey, I should tie this to a stick so I'm out of reach. Because once you figure that part out, it's like, okay, now we can experiment around with it and we can find out what's the best length stick to attach as a handle and stuff like that. So we're getting into our concept of let's tie a rock to a stick is spreading into science where it works better doing it this way. So let's start designing our stick or handle to better work. So already we're getting into, science is being created, or engineering, I guess, depending on how you want to But primitive man, if it is primitive man doing this, is coming across with things that work better and actually coming up with design ideas. Now, okay, so we're going to drill. We've got to somehow drill through stone. What would they have thought of that to do that with? If I pick up another piece of stone and hit it enough times, if I rotate it, it does better. How did we come with the idea we've got to drill through it, and we got to choose the right thing to drill through with? So, bone works better than stone, or putting some sand in there works better, or so somewhere along the way, someone had to come with this idea of how do we drill it, and what's the best method to use. Trial and error, you might find that twisting it works better than trying to pound a hole. Just random chance, you might notice. Oh yes, I'm trying to stick the stick in the ground. It works better if I turned it by accident and went down a little further. So random accident, you might realize that turning it works better. Over time, you eventually realize that turning it does work. So now let's find a method to turn it. Let's get this bow, and the idea if we wrap a piece of string around it and get the string moving back and forth, it'll twist back and forth, and that'll help. That's another level that our primitive man has to come up with. Assuming Lindy Bage was doing it correctly, which again, he had a working method, so it might be the correct way to do it. So that's again another non-obvious thing. Unless you've seen it done in the past, why would I think it would work now? So this is why I said, if Stone Age man did this, I want to consider the possibly, what if some of this stuff was done by more modern man who just didn't have the tools? We exile someone, and we don't let him take tools with him. He's, drive him off. He's got to live on his own. He wants to make his own tools. He's already got some knowledge of how tools are made because he lives in civilization. What if he just started making stone tools because he just applied knowledge he already had? That's basically what Lindy Bage did. So that would be an idea to consider. Although to say every case of Stone Age tools we find was done that way would be wrong. It would still be something to consider. Maybe some of them were made by people who had no other choice but to make a stone tool. They were isolated, they got exiled, they didn't have modern tools to build with, so they had to do this. It was obviously it was important. Again, when Lindy Bage did it, it took two people to drill a partial hole, one person to hold stuff in place, one to actually power it. Again, Stone Age man hunting mastodon, or just more modern man isolated. You want a tool, yes, having two men to make it, or spending the extra time to make it, extra effort. It would be reasonable. Yes, you might want to put the extra effort and extra thought in. So, the idea that this would be something one person would do, so Lindy Bage had it wrong. No, I mean it would be important enough at just about any point in time history. If you're going to rely on stone tools, that yes, they would spend the time to have an extra man help if necessary. And they would take the time. 3 hours to make a partial hole. Yes, but that's 3 hours well spent if this stone tool helps you do whatever it needs, you need to do with it. Probably, again, assuming Lindy Bage had the method right, over time they had found faster ways, and again, some of this was his 3 hours including the experimental time, or was it just the we got started, now we're going to start the timer, once we figured out what we're doing? Don't know. But just watching the video though and thinking, okay, Stone Age man, he wants to make a club, and so he's going to tie a rock to a stick and he's got his club, as opposed to Stone Age man needs to drill a hole, which means he needs to know, figure a way to build a drill, figure a way to hold it all in place while he's drilling. Suddenly, Stone Age man doesn't seem so primitive. And you got to wonder about that. And again, like I said, even if this was Stone Age man, what if some of this stuff was made by more modern humans who had no choice? That would make sense. But not all of them would be done that way. Some of it would be more primitive, perhaps. Saying every incident of Stone Age tool we found was made by a more modern man, probably not. Some of them were made by more modern man because he had to, possibly. Either way, it took some ingenuity to come up with the method to do it. And so this whole idea that man was stupid, and suddenly, we can write, we can build civilization, not necessarily. Man was somewhat ingenious even before he was considered civilized, it would seem. That's it. Have a nice day.